Hello, everybody. This is Georgianne Hughes, and this is the Byte Show. And we're very blessed to have Joseph Farrell, Dr. Joseph P. Farrell, on the line with us. And we're going to talk about some interesting things, I think, I hope.
Well, I do too.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me back.
Oh, anytime, Joseph. You know that. I wanted to ask you this issue about, in that article I sent you, there was a part where it said that the person had more plant genes than regular genes.
Right.
How can that be?
Well, you're talking about that article about GMOs?
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting that you picked that out. I had a lot of people send me that article.
Oh, I'll bet.
As you know, people send me articles all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's gotten to the point that I spend, when I blog, I don't hardly do any time anymore on my own looking, trolling the internet, looking for things to talk about.
Yeah.
I go through emails. I get that many articles from people, and it's really interesting to watch what people are tracking. And, when I sort through emails to do my blogs, I don't know how many people sent me that, Georgianne. I think it had to easily have been over 20. And I actually have a blog scheduled. I schedule blogs on every other Friday.
Yeah.
I usually schedule blogs about 2 weeks. People think I blog every day. I don't. I cheat and schedule blogs, one or 2 weeks at a time.
Yeah.
But I do have a blog coming up about that article.
Okay.
Because the GMO food thing, Dr. DeHart and I put a lot in our Transhumanism book about that. And in fact, he was the one that really kind of started us down that path in that book. And let's remind people of the subtitle. It's Transhumanism, and then the subtitle is A Grimoire of Alchemical Agendas.
Yeah.
And the premise that we kind of followed in the book was that transhumanism really is kind of alchemy version 8.0.
Yeah.
It's updated. And the thought occurred to us, and I'm going around Harvey's barn for a purpose here, so bear with me.
Okay.
The thought occurred to us that given the fact that GMO foods, in our opinion, did not appear to have been anywhere near adequately tested.
Right.
And by adequate, what we meant was we could find no real widely accepted intergenerational study of the long-term environmental and healthcare effects of these foods. In other words, if you're going to introduce GMOs into the food supply, we would have expected testing to be done for 20 or 30 years and monitoring human populations, animal populations, and so on. None of this, as far as we could tell, was ever done. And it occurred to us then that, all right, given the fact that GMOs are so very different than normal, what they're now calling heirloom seeds and heirloom crops, it became possible in our mind that the normal processes of a person's gastrointestinal digestive system might not be adequate to break down foreign DNA and transform it into the proteins and so on for nutrition.
Right.
And we posted this in the book, and I wrote a couple of blogs kind of reinforcing that possibility on my website. And Georgianne, you have no idea how viciously I was attacked by people, throwing around scientific terminology and calling me a buffoon and an idiot, and pointing out that normal digestive processes break down.Re's no danger of DNA contamination or what have you.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah. Oh,
and my response to this outcry was to to respond, well, look, I'm not stupid. I know that when I sit down and eat a slice of bacon, I'm not going to turn into a pig.
Right.
I know that when I eat ground beef or something, I'm not going to turn into, my DNA is not going to change and become partially bovine DNA and so on and so forth. I know that.
Mm-hmm.
But my point was to point out that genetic mutation, at least as far as some versions of evolutionary theory go, is a response to your environment, and certainly ingestion of food is part of our environment.
Right.
Now, lo and behold, this study comes along, and what it's saying is that they have found DNA in the bloodstream of people.
Yeah.
That has not been broken down adequately. Now, that's not unusual, because you do find in the bloodstream of people, you do find strings of DNA from other species. That's normal. But what the study is, in my opinion, and again, I'm not a geneticist, I'm not a gastroenterologist or anything of the sort, but what it's suggesting, the concern that they're raising, if you read that article carefully, is they use the expression at one point that this has happened, in their opinion, by, quote, unquote, some unknown mechanism.
Yeah.
And when I read that, Georgianne, this is almost the exact words that Dr. DeHart and I used in the book and that I was using originally to offer this hypothetical possibility, that there may be a mechanism we are unaware of that would allow the body or prohibit the body from recognizing tampered DNA strands to enter our bloodstream. And if that's the case, then it raises the possibility, although the article itself, I want to caution people, the article itself isn't saying what I'm about to say. It is not saying that they've noticed any genetic mutations within human DNA as a response to this. But it's raising the notch a little further. It's raising the peg a little further that it might be a possibility. Mm-hmm. Okay? This is why I go back to the fact that GMOs, in my opinion, had no real adequate testing.
Right.
And now they're finding this unknown mechanism that, for scientists to use that phrase, it's really saying, we don't know.
Yeah.
And we're playing with fire. That's the other implicit admission here.
Yeah.
Now, I want to throw out a possibility here, and it's a scary one. What if these agribusiness companies knew all along that there was this mechanism, this unknown mechanism? And furthermore, what if they know what it is?
Yes.
And are designing GMO crops accordingly with the ultimate intention, as we suggested in the book, of modifying humanity via the food supply. That was really our concern in proposing that whole scenario.
Yes.
And, again, I'm tossing that out there as a high-octane speculation that I put nothing past these people, and particularly these GMO companies that have used patent law to impose this junk in the food supply and sue people, even if they don't want it planted in their fields, if it happens to get dropped by a bird that's eaten some GMO seeds or whatever, bird droppings. They're suing people.
Or the wind blows.
Whatever happens, So, this study is raising the notch that we have to entertain possibilities that standard models of science say is impossible. And, people have to get through their heads that we have minds too. We can see possibilities too. Just because we don't have PhD in genetics tacked after our name doesn't make our concerns invalid.
Right.
And the scientific community has to start acting less like medieval priests and more like human beings and willing to entertain possibilities that fall outside of their scientific dogmas. This otherwise we can kiss Western civilization goodbye.
Yeah, in a big hurry.
In a big hurry.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's a very, very significant article, Georgianne, and I personally, between you and me, I found it very, very disturbing.
Oh yes, me too.
It goes directly to another point. In the book, we talked about what the GMO companies were calling substantial equivalence. All right.
Yeah.
And what that principle was they were arguing that because they're GMO corn or GMO soybeans or what have you, were, for all intents and purposes, substantially equivalent to non-GMO food, all right, non-GMO crops.
Yeah. That
scientific testing of an intergenerational nature wasn't really necessary, okay?
Gee.
It really is that ludicrous of an argument. If it looks like corn, tastes like corn, and has the same nutritional value as corn, then it's corn.
Oh, gee.
That's what they were saying.
Yeah.
But, substantial equivalence flew right out the window when it came to patents. Okay?
Yeah.
Then they were no longer substantially equivalent. We have a right, by golly, to patent this stuff and charge you an arm and a leg, if we find it in your field.
Yeah.
Well, now what this study is also suggesting, and this is something that I hope people pick up on here, what this study is suggesting is no, they're not substantially equivalent because they are affecting the bloodstream in a way that you would not encounter with normal heirloom crops.
Right. Absolutely true.
So, this is the other thing in the mix here. So, I don't care what the, Chief Justice Roberts and the U.S. Supremes say. Mm-hmm. This is no longer a matter of law. This is a matter of humanity. This is a matter of ethics. This is a matter of morality. And to keep imposing this junk on people and charging farmers an arm and a leg, even if they don't want to plant it in their fields, just because they spies that these agribusiness companies send out, to look at farmers' fields. No, none of this is true. We need to put a moratorium on this stuff.
Yeah. And
test it thoroughly. And that means intergenerational testing. I'm not a Luddite. I'm not against technology. I'm not against the use of science to try and improve the lot of humanity. And I think that was certainly at least a motivation for some of the people involved in creating GMOs. So, I'm not trying to brand them all as inhuman monsters.
Yeah.
But I do think there is that possibility that at some very deep level somebody may have known about this mechanism all along and decided that we're going to use this to modify humanity. We have to entertain that high octane speculation possibility. Anyway, that was a long way around Harvey's barn, but
well, Joseph, I mean, in South America, they've had cattle die. In Texas, they've had cattle drop dead in the field after eating the poisonous alfalfa that they're creating.
Well, it's not only that. In Denmark, I blogged a few weeks ago about a pig herd in Denmark that noticed that his litters of pigs were declining, and that his pigs were lethargic. They had no real appetite, and so on. Well, the whole point of raising pigs is that they're pigs. They have an appetite. You raise them for food supply, and he decided to run a little experiment and take his pigs off of GMO corn and stuff that he'd been feeding them. And lo and behold, the number of piglets that he was getting in his litters began to increase again. the pigs began to have appetites and to behave like pigs behave.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're playing with fire, and I blogged recently about another study that was done. I think it was done by the University of Iowa. I'm not real certain of that, but the other thing that farmers have noticed is that over the long term, the productivity of their fields declines with GMOs.
Yes, and it takes more water.
It takes more water.
Yeah.
The productivity declines. And in the long haul, it becomes more expensive to plant the stuff than it does regular crops.
Right.
So, market realities are beginning to hit home. So, in the long run, Georgianne, this may just have been shown to be a bad idea whose time has come and gone.
Well, this TPP thing that's full of PP, that gives Monsanto, for example, would have the right to sue any government, state government in our country if we didn't want to plant their crap.
Right.
And I mean,
well, this is part of, the whole agribusiness business model is part of a much wider problem in Western society. And the problem is, this is not capitalism, it's mercantilism. And there is a difference. Mercantilism is, crony capitalism, as I like to call it, at its best, because what it means is that you are using the power of government to create certain loopholes, sanctions, subsidies, and so on for an increasingly cartel-like atmosphere in the market. And, if you need a leg up like that, then you're no longer competitive. And that's the other problem here. Corporations there's so little difference anymore between government and corporations. I posted on my website just today, I posted former Assistant Secretary Catherine Austin Fitz's kind of autobiographical online book called Dillon, Reed and Company and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits. It's kind of a lengthy document, but people should read it because she goes into all sorts of copious detail on how the system works, this revolving door between so-called government and the so-called corporate world. Well, you're looking at two sides of the same coin. And, people have to understand this is why government is no longer responsive to the people, because in a certain sense it's lost its sovereignty. It's been bought out by, it's in effect what we've seen happen in Europe and North America and South America and Japan, so-called capitalist countries. What we've seen is the loss of governmental sovereignty. We've seen merger, in effect, between governments and the corporate world. And so governments are no longer responsive to the people they supposedly represent. Mm-hmm. This is the problem. So in that environment, we should expect the Supreme Court and justices to hand down decisions in favor of corporations and against producing farmers. It's a much deeper cultural problem that we're facing. This is why I keep insisting to people to wake up. George Carlin said something very interesting, the old comedian.
He said a lot of it. I love that guy.
Well, for those in our friends and listeners in Europe and elsewhere, he was a famous American comedian, and he oftentimes his comedy was political and satirical in nature because he exposed shortcomings in the system. One of the things he said is, his response was, if you vote, you have no right to complain. Because rather than, the argument that we hear all the time, if you don't vote, you have no right to complain. Well, I have news for you. I do have a right to complain because under our system of government, These are rights acknowledged by God.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you vote or not, you still have them. Okay?
Yeah.
And whether you vote or not, you still have free speech. You still have the right to life, liberty, and property, and so on and so forth. And he turns that argument right around. If you vote, you have no right to complain because you're the people that keep putting in the same idiots over and over again that are screwing the country. So,
good point.
Yeah, good point, George. Well said. Kudos.
You betcha. Oh, my gosh. Well, there was another article that came out that was talking about concentration camps.
Yeah.
And Justice, and I use that word laughingly, Scalia said.
Well, I call them the Supreme Court injustices.
Yeah. Said that in the case, he didn't use the words martial law. He said,
oh, I know the article you're talking about.
Yeah, in case of a mass roundup of people,
right.
Justice would stand aside.
Yeah.
Meaning, it's futile.
Well, if I remember correctly, in that article, he was talking in context about during World War II, many people don't know and are unaware that the United States rounded up Japanese Americans
and Germans
and Italians,
yes, in
some cases, and interred them in these camps. These places and facilities certainly exist. They've been talked about in the American alternative media for decades now.
Yeah.
I remember hearing stories of these camps going all the way back to the Reagan administration, if not before. My suspicion has always been that these things are precisely for what Injustice Scalia is talking about, that they have some sort of target population in mind. Who knows, who they are. But again, I don't put anything past these people, but what it's a signal of that I think people need to be aware is that, and I've talked about this, you've talked about this, other people have talked about this, so it's not unique and it's not all that unusual anymore. What it's a signal of, in my opinion, is the powers that be, whatever you wish to call them, the oligarchy, the technocrats, whatever you call them. I like to think of them as a pathological plutocracy.
Yeah. Yeah, psychopathic.
Well, it's psychopathic, sociopathic, what have you.
Yes.
It's a recognition, in a certain sense, that they are losing legitimacy. And the system is losing legitimacy.
Oh, yes.
It's widespread. It's all the way from the Ukraine to, Japan to any country you can think of. There's now this growing cynicism towards the institutions of government in their respective countries.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to the fact that governments are increasingly non-responsive to their people.
Yes.
And to what they wish. The only way around it, and Catherine Phipps put it very well in this article that I posted on my website. Let me read this to you.
Okay.
Let me pull it up here. At the end of this very long autobiographical thing, this is what she says, and I'm quoting. Here is my prediction for the New World Order. I don't know when. I don't know where. I don't know how many satellite systems, electromagnetic weapons, subliminal programming broadcasters, computer hackers, bioweapons labs, cocaine plantations, and how much environmental destruction they will enlist along the way. I don't know how many patents on fundamental life processes that Monsanto will claim sufficient to not let me cough without paying them a fee.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people the New World Order will reduce to poverty, assassinate, and torture before they fail. I just know that they will fail. Because ultimately, large, complex systems cannot be held together by greed, technology, and fear alone.
That's right.
Suspicion and lawlessness and smallness of mind ultimately cause implosion from within. Seeing the New World Order as they are accelerates their failure, particularly as it inspires withdrawing our resources from their control and shifting investment to alternatives to govern our global resources on a responsible wealth-creating basis. That is why we gather power for life as we withdraw from people, organizations, and efforts that are not authentic and shift our social affirmation, our time and attention, our currency and deposits, and our investments and our donations to authentic people, enterprises, and decentralizing solutions, unquote. And she's correct. What she's really saying is that they're losing legitimacy.
Yes.
And, that's the problem. It's a cultural problem. And you cannot restore legitimacy to the system until you've restored trust. And you cannot restore trust until you start acting with your policies and so on in ways that affirm the common good.
Well, with some morality, for God's sake.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what I mean. You can't have Nancy Pelosi's passing health care bills in the middle of the night behind closed doors. You can't expect legitimacy, and
right.
you just can't do this. And they're waking up and finding this out. It's interesting, Georgianne, to see the shift that has happened in the last 20 years. You and I remember times when anything said in Russian media would have been laughed at.
Yeah.
In the West. Now the shoe's on the other foot.
Yeah.
you have more legitimacy and perception of legitimacy of Putin's government in Russia, outside of Russia, than you would have thought possible 20 to 30 years ago. And the kick for me was RT, Russia Today, recently ran a series of articles accusing the West of godlessness.
Yeah.
Okay. So, we remember the time when it was the atheistic, godless, evil empire. And all of a sudden, the shoe's on the other foot. Well, again, it's a cultural phenomenon. It's not merely political.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't. When you say that changes the way that you have to perceive political ideology. It's not about conservatives versus progressives. This is smokescreen and theater to keep people from perceiving the problem in the system. The problem in the system is spiritual and cultural.
Yes.
It's the lack of morality on the part of so many that have pursued corruption and their own greed and their own profit at the expense of everybody else. And that's the difference, really, between finance capitalism and real wealth creation and productivity. And until people wake up and figure that out, nothing's going to change. I think people are waking up, and that's what has many of these crooks and criminals kind of concerned about their situation.
Well, good Lord, Joseph, they're committing suicide by suicide by suicide.
Yeah.
And a guy in Colorado recently put 8 holes in his body with a nail gun.
Yeah, well, I even did my news and views from the Nefarium about that story. I've seen the X-rays. And the problem here is these. Number one, you can't even get your hand in the back of your head with a nail gun to drive nails into your head the way this poor man was murdered. And I think what's happening, and people have to understand this, and I brought up an individual very short on my Facebook page, that I had commented about these bankers committing suicide, or being suicided, as I like to say.
Yeah.
And someone commented, well, no one's going to cry any tears for them. And I thought, now wait a minute here.
Right.
Wait a minute. One of these bankers that had committed suicide was a young man, 37 years old.
Yeah.
That had a wife, children, parents, and brothers and sisters. And we cannot and must not assume, first of all, that everybody in banking is evil and a criminal.
Right.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
That's just,
well,
even if they do work for J.P. Morgan Chase.
Wasn't that fellow? Didn't he jump out of a window?
There was two bankers, I believe, in London.
Yes.
And again, how do you jump out of windows on skyscrapers? They don't open.
Right.
So
right.
We've got another problem there. But the problem that I want people to understand is you cannot fall prey to this class hatred or class envy. Just because someone works for J.P. Morgan Chase or Citibank or Bank of America or Deutsche Bank or Barclays, what have you, doesn't perforce make them evil.
Right.
In many cases, this whole system has depended, and Secretary Fitz and I talked about this very recently, this whole system has depended on an informal network of contacts of people within different companies, intelligence agencies, and so on and so forth. And it's a very small group of people that are doing and committing all this fraud and all these crimes.
Yeah, and they are mostly at the ultra tip top.
Yeah, they are mostly at the ultra tip top, and I suspect, and I think many people are suspecting this, that the whole situation with all of these suicides is probably that these financial investment counselors and bankers and so on have discovered something in the course of their daily business life.
Yes.
And for whatever reason, they may have made intimations that they were going to expose it. In some cases, this fellow in Colorado that supposedly committed suicide with a nail gun.
Yeah.
That case, apparently he was under investigation, and there are rumors that he had agreed to cooperate with prosecutors.
Yeah.
So I suspect that what's really going on is that the system it's not close to collapse. I don't think people that keep repeating this are really understanding what's going on. I don't think that. I think it's more along the lines of Secretary Fitz's slow burn model rather than sudden collapse. I think what they're doing is they're finding things, and the real crooks and criminals are tidying up the loose ends.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is it's going to get to the point that there are so many little brush fires to stamp out, they can't stamp out all of them. That's really the problem.
I had a friend many years ago, Joseph, that he was brilliant with numbers.
Right.
And he did all the putting together of the corporation and the books, handling of the books, and he handled the SEC and all of that. Well, he discovered that two of the partners were, if it was ever discovered by the government, everybody would go to prison.
Right.
And he brought this up, and don't you know, he smoked a pipe, and his pipe tobacco was poisoned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't put anything past these crooks and criminals. I really don't. I really don't. If the system is going to survive, there needs to be genuine transparency. There needs to be a restoration of trust.
Right.
And, spying on everybody isn't going to do it. Throwing everybody into camps, well, that didn't work out too well for Mr. Hitler.
Yeah. Gee.
For that matter, it didn't work out too well for the Soviet Union. So, at some point, if they continue on this path, the system will break down.
Yes.
Just like that quotation from Secretary Fitz indicates, because you cannot have a functioning economy. Economy is ultimately based on trust. Commerce is ultimately based on trust.
Right.
Currency is ultimately based on trust. And trust, in turn, applies and demands moral behavior.
Yes. So,
it's not going to happen simply through politics. This is where so many are confused. This is not going to happen.
Well, yeah. It seems to me that they are frightened.
Yes.
And they are becoming more frightened of us.
Well, yeah.
And Joseph, in their desperation, I would not put it past them to pull off several huge false flags in this country and blame it on, say, Iran.
Blame it on Iran, blame it on the radical left wing or radical right wing, all the usual suspects.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that you say that, because if you look at the very wealthy and very powerful throughout history, this behavior is really nothing new.
Right.
We certainly see it in Venice. We see it in Florence.
Yes.
The Italian city-states, where the financial oligarchy attempts to create institutions and policies in their republics to protect themselves at the cost of everybody else.
Yes, that's another issue.
Yeah.
Since when do we have to obey laws that are totally absurd? I mean,
this is the other problem.
Yeah.
When you get to that point, that's what happens. Law itself becomes perverted.
Only about 3 million people were stupid enough to sign up for Obamacare.
Well, I don't know the statistics myself. I'm not even really talking about that. I'm talking about the wider phenomenon.
Yeah.
Of what happens when you encrust a society in so many contradictory laws. Mm-hmm. Law becomes a tool.
Yeah.
Of repression and of preservation of class and economic interest. And when that happens, it breaks down. Society inevitably breaks down, precisely for reasons that you say. People just simply quit.
Well, Turkey and Egypt and Bahrain, those fat guys over there have passed laws that it's against the law to have a demonstration.
Yeah. Well, when you've reached that stage, you have lost. And
Turkey passed laws to have greater control over the judiciary.
Yeah, well, again, it's like I say, when you've reached that stage, that you have to corrupt the institutions of government for a certain narrow class interest or economic interest or what have you, you've lost. Because that's an admission that you are no longer playing by the rules of the game. The rules of the game are very simple. Be nice.
Yeah.
Do good. These are things that, we
have respect.
Have respect for other people. Doesn't matter if they're poor or rich,
Right.
You don't, I'm more concerned, Georgianne, and I'll be very frank here.
Okay.
I'm more concerned about the potential backlash than I am about the super rich and the things that they're up to. And the reason I'm more concerned is we began to hear this rhetoric during the Occupy movement, all right? This hatred of anybody who had accumulated wealth and demands for redistribution. There were even demands, as I recall at one point, I've got an aircraft or helicopter flying over, there were even demands at one point that the Occupy people storm some of these big New York City banks and so on and so forth,
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, the Bolshevik Revolution turned into a nightmare.
Yeah, it sure did.
And we have to be very, very careful that in the process of trying to restore trust and so on, that we don't fall for ideological solutions. This is the other thing that people really have to get latched onto.
Right.
These hardened ideological positions of, well, in the United States it's conservative versus liberal or conservative versus progressive or whatever you wish to call it.
Gee.
And I posted another thing recently that goes right to the heart of what we're talking about. It was a recent Gallup poll that was done in this country. I think it was back in December. I'm not really sure, Georgianne, but back in December sometime, that asked people what their political affiliation was. And it set a record for the response. Something happened for the first time since polls like this were being taken.
Yeah.
And what it showed was only 23% of the population identified, of the voting population that were registered, identified themselves as dummy crooks. And only 21% of the population identified themselves as Republic thugs. And something like 46 to 47% of the population identified themselves as independents.
Oh, good.
Now, what that means is, again, it's another little indicator that the system is losing legitimacy.
Oh, yeah.
And that people are no longer willing to say that I adhere to this ideological position, come what may.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time that by today's standards, I would be considered a kind of conservative libertarian, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any social agenda or morality that I'm attempting to impose on other people. So that makes me kind of a libertarian. I do believe in individual responsibility, freedom, liberty, and an individual has the right to run their life the way they want to run it and accumulate whatever wealth they want to accumulate. So
Yeah.
I guess that makes me a conservative. But if I had been alive in, say, the late 19th century, I probably would have been considered a progressive because, by the same token, I do believe that society should attempt to have some sort of safety net for the very poor.
Yes.
I do believe that, things like working children in factories for 18 hours a day and giving them a slave wage is wrong.
Yes, it is wrong.
Okay, so I would have probably been a William Jennings Bryan Democrat populist way back when. So,
Yeah.
These ideological labels that we have, we've got to move beyond them. Because what they've done is they have created a polarization in the political process that ultimately is meaningless.
Yeah, it sure is.
Because it gets nothing done.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think people, if that Gallup poll's any indicator, people are at least sensing something's terribly wrong in the system and that it needs to be corrected.
Well, if they want more of what they got, just keep
voting.
voting.
For 'em.
Yeah.
Yeah, keep voting. Pull that party lever with D or R. And expect things to change. Well, no, it's not going to change. They're bought and paid for. They represent the corporate crony capitalism interest, and it's not going to change if you keep voting for them. My suggestion is delegitimize them. What if they held an election and nobody showed up? Well, they'd be exposed then for what they are.
Yeah.
And at that point, they either have to expose themselves as inclined towards tyranny, which certainly some of them are, or they have to change.
Yep.
One of two things. And ultimately, if they go the route of tyranny, that will ultimately fail. It always does.
Yes. Yeah, but the problem with it, Joseph, is that it only fails after millions of people have been killed. And that's where I have a big issue with it.
Well, I do too. I do too. we are in, I've been saying this all along, we are in one of those transitional periods. And it's a transitional period due to the technological advances, unlike any previous period in known human history.
Yeah.
And what this means, this is very important for people to understand, what this means is that the technocrats, the elites, the Bilderberger meetings and the Council on Foreign Relations and Trilateral Commission and Royal Institute of International Affairs and Bow groups and all of these study groups that the elites have and like to have their secret meetings and, plot world domination.
Yeah.
What it means is that they themselves are not certain of how all of this is going to work out.
Right.
Because things always naturally proceed faster than the ability of any central planning to keep up with. That's the problem.
Oh.
Sooner or later we're going to get it through our head that big government, big spending, big social programs, and centralization are not capable of factoring in the thousands, millions, billions of little calculations that are handled very adequately, by and large, by an uninhibited marketplace.
Well, I don't see where we in this country, the idiots that have been elected, I don't see where they have any right to go around and put sanctions on a country to force them into certain things. It makes me see red, Joseph.
Well, again, it's an old, it's not new or unique to the United States. It doesn't make it right. Certainly, I'm agreed with you.
Yeah.
But it's the old tactic of empire.
Yeah.
The United States is doing nothing that the British Empire didn't do.
Oh, right.
The British Empire didn't do anything that the Dutch didn't do. The Dutch didn't do anything that we're going back to that, Renaissance city-state in a swamp. that I'd like to go back to. The Venetian system, we've really been living, what people have to understand, for the last 500 years, we've been living in essentially a Venetian system.
Oh, boy.
we have. We've been living in a plutocracy, an oligarchy that has disguised itself behind institutions of various republics in Venice and the Netherlands, constitutional monarchy in Great Britain and so on. But the pattern is the same. And it's that pattern, I think, that's the other problem here. Because to a certain extent, it's breaking down. The model is breaking down.
Yeah, their playbook is getting pretty old.
You and I have talked about that, too.
Yeah.
The playbook is so old, and they keep doing the same thing, and everybody knows it. Well, imagine going to a football game or a soccer game or what have you, where you see over and over again the same thing. Pretty soon, you get bored.
Yeah.
It becomes obvious that the whole thing is staged and that it's theater, and that's the other thing that's happening. They don't have any new ideas, and we've talked about that. If you're Mr. Rockefeller, and your family has sponsored through its foundations and so on the same worldview, and you surround yourself with people of such a similar point of view, you pretty soon have boxed yourself in that you are incapable of thinking outside your own box.
Yeah.
And I think this is, to a certain extent, what is also happening. These people are incapable of creative, imaginative thought. They think, and this is part of their paradigm, they think that there's overpopulation, limited resources, and we're in a win-lose situation, so we've got to grab all for ourselves that we can grab. And that's a cosmological view. And it's a view that I think is fundamentally flawed.
Oh, yeah. There's spiritual consequences tied to that.
Yeah, of course there are.
Yeah.
Of course there are. Of course there are. And we've got to get into the position that no, we're we're not talking about taking away your wealth and power. We just want the opportunity of a voice, a real genuine voice, and the same win-win situation rather than win-lose.
Yeah.
Because there's no reason that we have to buy into this model of depleting resources and so on.
Yeah.
We need to understand something. The elite lives in a world of status quo.
Mhm.
They want to preserve their status, their power, their wealth. And because of this, they tend to look at everything as being fixed.
Mhm.
There are certain resources that we need and we need to protect. Petroleum. Okay, but the problem here is that petroleum didn't become a resource until technology made it possible to use it in creative ways.
Yeah.
Petroleum wasn't a resource in the 18th century. It was just black goo that you found in the Arabian desert in, oh yeah, it burns, that's nice, but we can't really use it.
Yeah.
Silicon didn't become a resource until the computer age, and on we can go. So resources are never static. This is the other thing that people have to get through their minds. And, talking about petroleum, I'm one of those that has misgivings about the idea, profound misgivings, that petroleum is a fossil fuel.
Yes.
That whole meme, really, if you examine it closely, was pushed by the big oil men in the late 19th century.
Right.
Because it meant that, okay, this is a scarce resource, therefore we create a climate of opinion that drives up the value of our investment. See what goes on there?
Yeah.
And they do this, that's how they use the law. By passing certain laws, they create a climate or context in which their investment becomes more valuable. That autobiographical sketch of Secretary Fitz that I posted talks about that very thing in connection with private prisons. How do you increase the value of private prison stock? Well, you pass laws making mandatory sentencing for certain kinds of drug use necessary, and that creates the climate where your corporate stock in these private prisons goes up because of the climate. So, it's mercantilism all over again.
Well, and that's another issue, are these damn prisons. I mean, they're locking up willy-nilly,
I know.
And, Joseph, prisons are about the most barbaric, torturous thing invented. I mean, it doesn't rehabilitate anybody.
Well, it's worse than that. As you know, I knew somebody in prison years ago.
Yes.
That had a terminal illness.
Yes.
And this private prison, at certain points, ran out of medications.
Mm-hmm.
And wouldn't refill them for a couple of weeks.
Oh, gee.
And this ended when I threatened a big ACL lawsuit.
Oh, gosh. Good for you.
The problem is that these things, again, we can look at what's happening in another way. Back in the 60s and 70s, if you went into a corporation to be hired for a job, what department did you go to? You went to the Department of Personnel, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But somewhere along the line, they decided to start calling them the Department of Human Resources.
Yes.
Yeah, you see, so you've been reduced to a profit-making scheme.
Right.
And that's the thing that has happened under mercantilism, is that they try and fasten all of these things around the human being to commoditize human labor, human work.
Oh.
And we know whose doctrine that is.
Yes.
So Mr. Marx meets Mr. Rothschild.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
We've got to get back to the idea that the individual is, to the sanctity of life, that the individual is a sovereign entity, and that this is the ultimate foundation of any society and culture that is going to be stable.
Yes, but they don't want a stable culture. I'm convinced
well,
of it.
I certainly agree that there are some that don't.
Well, look at that old fool, what's his name? McCain. John McCain. There's no fool like an old fool. And, the people that keep electing this idiot need, what I would like to do. Well, I mean, he's saying he's still on this, we've got to bomb Syria. They've gone now from Iran over to Syria again.
Yeah, I know.
They're crazy.
Well, once you get in, this is the problem. Once you get into mercantile, central bank, once you get into that model, the empire and war become a permanent state of affairs.
Yes.
And you cannot keep the empire functioning
without war.
Without war.
Oh, gee.
And what that inevitably does is war siphons off productivity that ultimately is destructive to the very society that engages in it.
Yeah.
And this is, if you don't understand the complete imbalance of the American empire in terms of its expenditures, we are spending more on defense in this country than the next 5 major powers combined.
I wouldn't call it defense.
Well,
I would call it war. War merchandise.
Well, you know what I mean. I'm not here to nitpick, but yeah, when you're in empire mode, that's what you do.
Oh, gee.
And again, it's an old model. It's the Venetian model. You send your war galleys to the Eastern Mediterranean. You sack Constantinople. You get.
Do you hear that?
Yeah.
Spanky's dreaming.
You get the Venetian model of extracting trading privileges and so on and so forth, and the whole system then becomes a vicious circle. It's at some point we have to wake up and understand that we also need to have a fundamental debate about our institutions and have we modeled them correctly. And that's, I think that's the other thing that has some of these oligarchs running a little scared, is that they realize that debate is taking place with or without them.
Yeah.
It's certainly happening on the internet. This has been the big problem.
Yeah.
But, even if they clamp down on the internet, like it or not, that debate's going to continue.
Oh, yeah.
People are just, I like what the Russians did when they bought all those typewriters a couple of years ago.
I love it. Oh, yes.
So, okay, we can't listen in anymore because the Russians are sending everything by typewriter.
Yeah.
So.
Good move.
Well, it's... there's other moves afoot that I'll be blogging about in a couple of weeks that should make the and probably already have made the Anglo-American oligarchs sit up and take notice. There are moves afoot. The whole thing is kind of backfired on them. And,
good.
Well, I've mentioned that before, Georgianne.
I know.
The post-Soviet era, when they threw the dice and went for broke, we're going to impose Pax Americana on everybody and transition into this new world. Well, that didn't work so well because they got some pushback, from little things like China and Russia. So,
yeah.
And how were they not expecting that? This is what
because they have their schwingfing so far, Joseph, that they think theirs don't smell.
Well, it's something like that. I don't know. you look at the power elite. The other thing that's happening is, and people need to bear this in mind. 20 to 30 years ago, it was David Rockefeller and Baron Rothschild and Henry Kissinger. These were the movers and shakers.
Yeah.
What you have now is Zbigniew Brzezinski. These people are getting old.
Yeah, they sure are.
They're being replaced by young Turks who haven't nearly the experience, nearly the restraint, and for that matter, nearly the culture.
Yeah.
And it's this new group of young Turks that's also part of the problem, is they are even less able to think out of the box than their mentors.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the other problem. And the final big problem that people need to bear in mind is this whole hidden system of finance. I keep going back to this because it's so important. People have to understand this. When President Truman took the decision to keep all of that Axis loot secret,
yeah,
and to use it as a top secret slush fund for covert political operations and for black projects research, what that did was it put the American intelligence community into the drug money business, and it put the American intelligence community into the banking business.
Mm-hmm.
And the fraud in the system that this perpetuates is so endemic to the system.
Oh, yeah.
You have to understand this, that so much of the system is dependent on criminal activity. This
like
is the
drug running,
and
gun running.
Bingo.
Yeah.
This is the other part of the problem. And what's happening, in my opinion, is that system is being exposed, and by being exposed, it's breaking down.
Well, it's not. Go ahead.
Well, the exposure is coming in two different ways, and this is the other important thing that people must understand. The exposure is coming not only from independent researchers and whistleblowers who are pointing out, this is all over the internet. They're pointing out the amounts of gold are not correct, and gold has been rehypothecated, and on it goes. I'm certainly not the only one out there saying all this. There are literally hundreds of little independent researchers that have noticed this or that aspect of this very huge problem.
Oh, yeah.
And they're talking about it. They're blogging about it.
Good.
All right? But the other problem is you have major players involved in sending the same message. Let's look at Germany here for a minute, okay? Our good friends, the Germans. Okay.
Oh, yes.
And again, I mean that. The German people are not. They're not out for world domination or any of this nonsense. The German government is a different thing.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
And you have in Germany the interesting case where the German people were the ones pushing for gold repatriation and a full accounting of everything that's going on.
Yeah.
All right. Now let's look at what's happened. I have blogs coming up about this. The Bundesbank finally caved in a couple years ago to all this pressure and demanded repatriation of Germany's gold.
Yeah.
Okay. And they've been getting it in a very slow trickle. Okay. And there are rumors that what they've got has not been good delivery gold. It's been coin gold. You know what that is?
Yeah, kind of.
Well, coin gold is gold that has been mixed with other metals to use in coins. Because here's the thing that people don't understand. When you're on a gold standard, when you issue gold or silver currency in the form of coins or paper certificates backed by those commodities, the coins themselves always make sure that the bullion content of the coin is of less value than the stamp on the coin.
Right.
Because if it's more value, people hoard the coins, melt the bullion down, and sell it.
Yeah.
Okay, so the whole purpose, you see what's going on.
Yes.
Well, the Bundesbank asked for, back in 1968, asked for some of its gold.
Mm-hmm.
And what they got was coin delivery.
Oh, boy.
They did not get London delivery, good London delivery standard gold.
Mm.
Now, if you go further back in history, I've pointed this out many, many times on my website. Hjalmar Schacht, our good friend, Hitler's Reichsbank president, okay?
Yeah.
Remember him?
Yes.
Well, Hjalmar Horace Greeley Schacht, to give him his full German-American name, which should tell you something.
Oh.
Hjalmar Schacht took a trip in 1928 to visit his good friend, Benjamin Strong, who was the governor of the New York Federal Reserve. And Strong takes him down into the vaults of the New York Federal Reserve. And they're looking around at all the stacks of gold, and Schacht very naturally asks to see the Reichsbank gold.
Yeah, sure.
And the staff of the Federal Reserve run around, and they eventually report back to Strong in front of Schacht that they can't find it.
Oh, boy.
Now, stop and consider this. This is 1928.
Yeah.
And the Reichsbank's gold is missing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd be pretty PO'd.
Well, Schacht, interestingly enough, in his memoirs writes that he said, "Oh, that's okay. I know you're good for it."
Uh-huh.
Okay. Now, what I suspect, Georgianne, is putting everything I've said about this whole hidden system of finance into perspective. I've said many times that the initial purpose of the Bilderberg Group, in my opinion, was to take all that Nazi loot and coordinate how it was going to be laundered into the Western banking system and then piped back into Europe as credits for the post-war rebuilding of Europe. So in other words, you had the Anglo-American plutocracy sitting down at the same table with a bunch of Nazis like Prince Bernhard.
Yeah.
And coordinating their effort, okay? This means they struck a deal with the Nazi devil. And I've said many times, when you make bargains with Martin Bormann,
oh, boy,
you're bargaining with Dick Cheney without the warmth and charm.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And that sooner or later, I've also said this, the marker will come due.
Yeah.
Ah, bingo. There it is. I suspect that the whole German gold repatriation thing, Georgianne, was Germany sending the message.
Oh.
We know it's not there.
Yeah.
We want it back anyway.
Oh, boy.
So Germany is playing real geopolitical, financial hardball. There are other moves afoot that indicate to me that there's a huge geopolitical realignment taking place right under our noses as we speak. And it concerns Europe, it concerns Germany, it concerns the Western financial system. And I'll clue you in on what's going on. I intend to blog about it, but I'll talk about it here.
Tell me, please, that the EU is coming apart.
No, it's not coming apart.
Oh, dear.
It's not coming apart. What's happening? The German foreign minister recently went to Moscow to talk to his counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, in Moscow.
Yeah.
This is within, I think, the last couple of weeks. It may have even been within the last couple of days. And what's the subject of their discussion? The Ukraine.
Yes.
Okay? And the whole purpose, the whole point, I have a blog coming up about this that I've already scheduled, all right? So be watching for it.
Okay.
The whole purpose is Russia and Germany have decided that they need to make some sort of common cause and be perfectly transparent about the Ukraine. Now, what this means is they are taking issue quietly, but very effectively, with American attempts to destabilize the Ukraine and install essentially a pro-American puppet government.
Right.
That's what's going on here.
Yeah.
And the reason it's going on is Germany is very dependent on Russian energy supplies.
Yeah.
Okay? And what's happening is a geopolitical, and this goes all the way back to Bismarck. What's happening is a German realignment with Russia. And if you've studied the historical record, beginning way back with the government of Chancellor Adenauer after World War II, this was ultimately the goal of the German foreign policy elite.
Uh-huh.
So I hope you heard what I just said.
Yeah.
This goal is 50 years plus old.
Oh my gosh.
This has been part of the plan of what I've called the Nazi International all along.
Wow.
Wow. Now, let's go further.
Oh, no. Oh, boy.
There's something else happening.
Okay.
Germany and France. Remember France?
Vaguely.
Vaguely. You know, that troublesome European ally of ours that has hydrogen bombs on nuclear missiles in submarines. Okay.
Yeah, the froggies.
Yeah, you know, and I say that to remind people, France is a thermonuclear power.
Yes.
France can destroy this country just as easily as Russia can. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Remember this. France in 2010 recently tested a new submarine-launched intercontinental ballistic missile.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? You can go online and see the YouTube videos of this company in France that makes these missiles for the French Navy. Okay?
Yes.
Now, these missiles are tipped with 100 kiloton warheads. All right, 100 kilotons is about 10 times the size of the Hiroshima bomb.
God!
Yeah, we're talking. You know, by hydrogen bomb terms, we're talking small hydrogen bomb, but we're talking a really big bang nonetheless. All right.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing: most people don't know about, and I have this posted in my blog. The French company that builds these missiles builds them as part of an international consortium that includes Germany. Okay? And it's actually, when you dig around, it's actually the Germans that are building the warheads.
Yes.
Okay? So stop, folks, and consider what this means. This means that Germany is a de facto thermonuclear power in its own right. And I've been arguing this for 30 years, and people think I'm nuts. But it's the truth. Germany is the hidden nuclear power in the world, all right? They have recently sold 6 of their diesel-electric submarines. These are German U-boats that are very, very advanced, and they're very quiet.
Yeah.
A nuclear submarine is very noisy because you have to keep the reactor cooled. A diesel-electric submarine is very, very quiet, almost undetectable. And they've recently sold 6 of these things to Israel with cruise missile launching capability underwater.
Yes.
Okay, so in other words, you're dealing now with 2 countries in Europe, very powerful countries. Okay, that's background to the thing I'm about to say. Germany and France, within, I think, the last couple of weeks, decided that they need to cooperate to create an independent European internet. Yeah. Now, what that means, folks, is that they are trying to construct a system impervious, or at least more secure, against American spying. In other words, when we tapped Chancellor Merkel's phone, that was it. And the answer as we're now learning from Berlin and Paris, is a very firm no, nein. Okay.
Right.
And what that means is Europe, led by France and Germany, are intent upon being a major independent third force in the world.
Oh, boy.
Independent of the United States. So all of these signals are adding up to even more pushback against this Anglo-American plutocracy. And again, I've been saying this all along. You're looking at factional infighting at the very top, and it looked as if, a few years ago it was going to be the American oligarchy that was going to be running the show. Well, au contraire. I warned people that this would happen.
Yeah.
I said that, get out of your mind that you're dealing with a monolithic conspiracy. You're dealing with the mafia.
Yes, international.
You're dealing with an international mafia.
Yeah.
And there's no way that the European powers are going to sit by and let all the shots be called in Washington, D.C. and London. There's just no way.
Right.
They won't do it. And you're seeing it come home to roost. This is... I can't tell you how major this pushback is. This is huge.
Oh, yeah.
This is huge. If they are successful, I'll make a little prediction. If they're successful to any degree in doing all of this, what they're going to do is create a parallel system of international financial clearing.
Yeah. Aside from SWIFT? Aside from all the suspect entities now that they now probably have come to the conclusion are too penetrated by American intelligence, you're going to look at the BRICS countries attempt to establish their own international financial clearing. This is an inevitability. Yeah.
And if they're even successful to any degree, you're also going to see the Europeans push the American bases out. That's ultimately what the goal is.
Good grief. Ecuador has requested that the American military get the hell out of his country.
Yeah, well, it's going to happen. What's happening is the New World Order, the American version of it's falling apart. Now, this is not to say that you haven't got a bunch of European elites that want to run the show for themselves.
Right.
So there will inevitably be pushback in that instance. But for now, you've got this huge blowback happening because America has lost trust, and we're back to that issue again.
Yeah.
We've become a military power, an empire.
Arrogant.
Arrogant, yes. Fiddling in everybody's backyard and trying to tell them what to do. This is an inevitability.
Well, empires aside, I just don't see where this country has the right to tear down a country and install whomever they want.
Well, I agree. But this has gone on throughout history. Major powers always interfere in the internal affairs of smaller, less powerful nations.
Yeah, and at the same time tell their people, an article came out about the EU going after pensions and, their people's savings. And then the very next day, one comes out that the Americans are going to do the same thing.
Well, yeah. If they do this, I think it will backfire major, big time, because again, you're resorting to coercion and theft essentially.
Yeah.
And
robbery,
and again, it's you can't just steal. You have to convince people that they're going to get it back somehow, but they're not doing that, and that's why they're encountering the problems. But getting back to Germany here for a minute, I hope people understood what I just said, because forget about Iran and their nuclear program. What I've just told you is that Germany and France are cooperating in building intercontinental ballistic thermonuclear missiles.
Yeah.
To put on submarines.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, where's the outcry?
And Germany has sold, I think, 6 of those puppies to Israel.
Yeah, I just mentioned that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Iran, it isn't just the United States Iran has to worry about. It's Europe.
Yeah.
So, and again, American policy in the area has attempted to do all this unilaterally, and it got smacked down big time by Mr. Putin. So it's going to continue. The problem that everyone has is to get through this period without a major war. That's the big problem.
Yeah. Oh, Joseph. I hate to say it, but this country is probably going to go to war.
Well, I don't think so. I don't think it's strong enough. I just don't
They're
think it's
creating robots.
Oh yeah,
they're
creating all sorts of technological gadgets and gimmicks and wizardry, and the reason why is, in a certain sense, rather comforting. It's because they cannot even trust their own military anymore.
Yeah. They've double-dealed and dirtied them
so long.
Yes,
that it's I know several veterans.
Yes.
And I'm certainly not a jingoist. I'm not one of these going around thanking people for their service, because what service has become is service to this pathological plutocracy.
Yeah.
And, but by the same token, I know many veterans that come back from these things woken up.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
Big time, It began with Vietnam. That was really kind of the turning point for popular perception of the military's role in this weird system.
Do you know what I heard? That an infantryman in Vietnam, his life expectancy from the time he left the airplane and jumped out into the jungle was 15 minutes.
Yeah, it was bad. It was very, very. I think that was actually officers, but in any case, it was very bad.
Yeah.
And again, that whole thing, really, what was it for?
Yeah.
If you look at the structuring of the drug trade, that was a major component of it, I think.
Well, look at Afghanistan.
Again, the same
drug
thing.
trade.
Yeah.
Billions and billions and billions of dollars in drugs.
That's because the system has become dependent on it, and that's the other part of the problem. So this is the situation we're in. People need to understand this, because I think the real solution again is you have to think in decentralized terms. You have to think in terms of local investments and so on and so forth. I don't know if that's making any sense or not, but
a question. We know that a lot of the police, in order to be a policeman, you have to have a low IQ.
Don't hold back, Georgianne.
Well,
that's what you really think.
Well, it's true. They're not like the police
that we grew up with.
Yeah, that we grew up with, or even 5 years ago.
No, I agree.
Where in the hell do they get so many stupid cops that go around beating up people, shooting people while their hands are in the air?
Well, they've been pushing for this militarization of local police for a very long time.
Yeah.
If you look at what's been happening, this goes back. I'm quite convinced, Georgianne, all of this goes back to decisions that were taken during the Reagan administration.
Yeah. Lord.
And it was all part. We're looking at the blowback of the plan that William Casey and G.H.W. Bush and others came up with to end the Soviet Union. That was literally the goal. And, of course, it was successful. But in the process, they increased the amount of fraud in the system, and they knew that there would be blowback. So they started making their domestic plans accordingly way back when. I think that's where part of it starts. But, again, pardon me, I'm trying to make a cigarette here.
Okay.
And I'm not... Can we pause?
Yes. Hold on, everybody. Okay, Joseph. Everybody, we are back.
Yeah.
About the police, though, Joseph, I mean, they have become totally mindless with their bullying and beating up women and smashing their faces into the pavement and, men that they've ordered out of their cars holding their hands up over their head and shoot them. I mean, what in the hell is going on? This is like Nazi Germany.
Yeah, it is, and that's the message they want. This is the flip side of this retrenchment scenario that I've been arguing is going on. They have got to make sure that their power base, which is North America, is secure. All right. I suspect strongly that a deal was made prior to the election of President Obama to his first term. Yeah. Between the dummy crook elite and the oligarchs, the technocrats, and so on, to deliver real gun control and ultimately confiscation. I think this is what the various school shootings were about. They were attempting to create a climate of opinion to stampede people into surrendering their guns. And all it's done is increase. It's created the reverse problem. Yeah. People have not done this. Right. In New York State, they set up the gun hotline and so on. Well, those people are crazy. Well, yeah, but the problem, you see what the problem is. They Schumer. Well, beyond that, the problem is they have been totally unsuccessful in this. So now you have the government buying up all sorts of ammunition. Well, again, that really isn't a solution. Any sort of widespread civil unrest doesn't make their power base secure. In fact, it endangers it even more. Right. So I suspect that this is what's going on, and the effort to do this failed hugely. And will probably continue to do so. So we see them trying to change their tactics a bit, with all these drills, trying to take out power plants with rifles, which is, one of the dumbest ideas. Yeah. Oh, gosh. Ain't going to fly. Yeah. Because, again, you have too much perception now that false flags are the way these people operate. So, no one's going to believe it. They've cried wolf one too many times. So they've got a real problem. And behavior like this from law enforcement officials isn't going to be any better. It ultimately defeats their purpose. And you have pushback, again, even within law enforcement from sheriffs and so on and so forth. They're just not going to go along with this. Well, isn't a lot of what the cops are doing, isn't that, it begins with a G, they did it. No, they did it in Italy. The stay behind people. Oh, the Gladio. Gladio, yeah. I mean, they've shot children. Well, I'll tell you what the problem is. It's like Israel. God. Well, it's worse. It's much worse. The problem they have. And this, let me go around Harvey's barn again. Okay. You recall the exposure of the phone call that the State Department official Victoria Nuland made, where she used some very choice, unladylike language about the EU. Right? And this phone call was leaked, if I recall correctly, ultimately by the Russians. All right? They gave it major play on RT, Russia Today's website.
Yeah.
Right? And shortly thereafter, we have the visit to Moscow of the German foreign minister. Now, I don't know about you, but the last time we had German foreign ministers visiting Moscow to talk to Russian foreign ministers, we ended up with World War II.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Good grief. Gee.
So, you know, that gave me a little pause right there.
Yeah.
And I've outlined my reasons why I think that was a very significant visit in terms of long-term geopolitical realignment. All right, but let's look at the phone call. What that was it was either Germany or Russia, probably both, sending a message. We are listening to you, too.
Yeah.
And we're not above letting the whole world know what you're saying.
Right.
Okay? Now, that's significant because what that means is they're willing to expose themselves to the same charges of electronic spying that the NSA and the Ed Snowden affair.
Yeah.
Okay? And the reason that they're willing to take that risk is their stock in public opinion around the world is a lot higher than ours. Okay?
Yeah.
The other thing it means is that we can play the covert operations game, too. Now, stop and consider really what I've just said there, Georgianne.
Oh, yeah.
If the United States can clearly be involved in fomenting all these so-called color revolutions in former republics of the Soviet Union, like the Ukraine, okay, they have their covert operations teams, too.
Oh, yeah.
In this country. And they can just as easily start fomenting and playing to American public opinion and cynicism with the corrupt state of affairs in this country if they should choose to do so.
Right.
So this was another huge message. You're playing in our backyard. Do you want us to play in yours? And this is the other problem they're facing. There's been, for years, Georgianne, I remember way back during the late years of the first Thistle administration, as I like to call them now.
You're so handy with descriptions.
Well, when you think of that family, they've really been nothing but a pestilence. They're weeds.
Yes, they are. Oh.
When you go back in time to the late years of the first Thistle administration, on into the early years of the Clinton administration, there was all this talk about foreign troops, Russians, on American soil.
Oh, yeah.
And this has been a repeated meme on the Internet. I don't pay much attention to it because, again, if we've got our covert operations teams over there, they've got theirs over here.
Right.
The problem that most people that give credence to these stories is that they're thinking this is all one big New World Order plot, and the Russians are going to play along with the American oligarchs when they clamp down, and Russian troops will be sent around, or German or Chinese or what have you, will be sent around rounding up all our guns, and that's when the defecation hits the rotary oscillating motor. Okay?
Yeah. Ooh, splat.
Yeah. And my problem with this whole thing is, again, people are thinking that this is a monolithic thing. It's not. You've got factions. So it would be the height of stupidity for the American pathological plutocrats to rely on the Russians to do their bidding for them.
Yeah.
If anything, it would be the perfect opportunity for these other powers to break up the United States, as has been their goal for a long time.
Yeah.
into smaller, more manageable units, so to speak. So, I don't place any stock in that kind of analysis, but I do think that the Newland affair, that phone call, it wasn't so much what she said, it was the fact that the phone call was leaked to begin with, and leaked by foreign powers, and leaked in a context that involves visits of the German foreign minister and announcements of Germany and France that, they're going to construct their own internet, by golly, we've had it with this.
So is Argentina.
And so is Argentina, so is Brazil, This is not looking good if you're the Anglo-American power elite. They've managed to create some fierce opposition.
Oh, good.
Well, not necessarily good. I'm not jumping on that bandwagon. I think it's good that they're getting pushback.
Yes.
But I don't think at this stage of the game that we're looking at actions of friends on the part of Europe and Russia.
No, nobody is our friend.
Well,
nobody on this whole planet. Joseph.
I've said that before too. We've managed to piss off not just a lot of small nations, but some pretty powerful ones.
Yeah. Darn right.
And how did that invasion of Russia work out for you, Napoleon?
Yeah. Oh.
It's coming unraveled is what I'm getting at, and they are retrenching at a furious pace. And the problem they face is their own domestic pushback. They've lost people here, and the only way they are going to restore it, the only way, is by reestablishing some sort of trust and confidence, and that can only be done by allowing a real voice on the part of the people, and to quit passing these tyrannical laws, be it Obamacare or what have you. This is the only way.
Well, I was thinking the only way would be for them to hide their corruption better.
Well, yeah, but that's not working out too well.
Yeah. Oh.
It's they've paraded it openly, and now we have Jeb Thistle and Hillary Clinton are being talked about as the two main candidates. It was interesting how they took Chris Christie out of the picture.
Yeah.
You're looking at another replay of the same Clinton-Bush nexus for the next election, and I think that's another reason for the Gallup poll I mentioned earlier. People's confidence in the system is, do we want another Thistle in the White House, or for that matter, another Clinton?
Yeah. Oh, boy.
You see, it's not much of a choice, folks, because those two families are thick with each other.
Yeah, they are.
I mean, they have been since the Mena, Arkansas business.
Yeah.
So it's, just keep running the same playbook out, folks, and eventually you're going to end up in a dead end, and then things are really going to get interesting. So it's a mess.
Oh, boy, you can say that again and again and again.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, Joseph. Well, something has to be done with the corporations. I mean, either ban them or something.
I don't think you can ban corporations, and the reason why is, like it or not, corporations have done a lot of good in our history. Most of what we enjoy in our lives have been products of corporations. They've done a tremendous amount of good. The problem that I think needs to be addressed is this notion that corporations are persons in law.
Yeah.
I'll believe that when the state of Texas executes one of them.
Yeah, and that speech, money is speech.
Yeah. That's the problem. We have to look at that doctrine and really reassess whether or not it's what corporations really are. I don't think they are. And as you know, I wrote that bit in Financial Vipers of Venice, trying to show how this is all coming out of a theological doctrine, which is in itself a huge error.
Yes.
If you look at the doctrine of original guilt within Western Christianity, what it is, it's the doctrine of corporate personhood.
Yeah.
And it's a rather blatantly immoral one, because what it's telling you is that you come into the world guilty, morally culpable before the law of someone else's misdeeds.
Yes.
So if that's the case, then it needs to be applied across the board. If corporations do wrong and harm people, then are you willing to kill them? Are you willing to disband them? Well, so far, the practice of law hasn't done this. So we need to reassess this whole doctrine. But getting rid of them altogether, let me put it differently. When we were talking way back when about the Nazi International series, I pointed out that most people are totally unaware of the fact that Interessengemeinschaft Farbenindustrie, IG Farben, was only finally legally liquidated in 2003.
Yeah.
Most people think IG Farben just rolled over and went into the dark of the night at the end of World War II.
Yeah.
It took 6 decades to untangle all of its license and cartel arrangements that it had made with so many corporations all over the world.
Yeah.
And what we're looking at, I think, is something not so much corporations. We're looking at cartels.
Yes.
And that's different.
Yes,
because again, that is the ultimate end of any mercantilist kind of capitalism. You have the formation of monopolies or near monopolies, of these huge, almost quasi-sovereign entities that have, as part of their corporate charters, no guarantee of fundamental human rights. So again, if we are to really look and examine the structure of corporations in our history of jurisprudence, it may be perhaps that we need to now insist, as part of their formal incorporation and chartering, that fundamental human rights are read into that charter.
Yes.
This business of the corporations like to pull of having employee meetings where everybody has to show up, even if it's your day off.
Yeah.
Well, at that point, no, I'm sorry. You rent my time. You don't own it.
Right.
You don't compel it. I've been, in my life, a member of a corporation that did this repeatedly to me. And I finally just told them, I'm not showing up. This is my day off. You don't own this time. This is, you got to do this or you're going to get written up. No, I don't have to do it at all. Write me up if you want. We've got to start having either acknowledgement of fundamental human rights on the part of corporations, or we have to take away their privileged status in law. One of the two.
Right. I don't think they should have privileged status.
Well, I don't either.
I don't think any company should have privileged status.
Well, it didn't start that way. This is the problem. It didn't start that way. In German law, it's very clear by the way a corporation is termed. It's called Aktionsgesellschaft. AG is the abbreviation for Inc. in Germany.
Yeah. And
Aktionsgesellschaft means action society. In other words, a society is chartered in law to perform certain actions. Okay. And again, that's very much a product of that doctrine of original sin and corporate personhood, because it's defining the person as the sum total of their functions or actions, and hence that's why you have the idea of human resources being the ultimate reductio of that idea. Well, the fatality, the fatal metaphysical logic here is that persons are more than the sum total of their actions, memories, or emotions. That's the soul. That's not the person. So we need to examine some deep seated cosmological beliefs in our culture before we can start talking about curbing the power of corporations and so on. Again, I think the problem isn't really the corporation; it's cartel. It's cartelism.
Yeah.
That to me is the big problem.
It's huge.
It's huge, yes.
Oh, Joseph, I want to ask you a question. And it involves doctrine that preachers have spewed out for a long time. That that the Hebrews had to go around and kill everybody so that Jesus would be born pure. Now, in Numbers 31, 17 to 18, it says, "Go ye forth and kill all the boys, and kill every woman who has slept with a man. But keep alive for yourself every little girl who has never slept with a man."
Okay.
Now, these SOBs had sex with those little girls.
Yeah.
And they raised those babies.
Well,
and those.
So what's the question?
Well, I mean, how can they say that anybody's pure?
They can't. That's the problem.
Right.
That whole theological argument, I know exactly what you're talking about, Georgiana. It comes out of a certain strain within predominantly American evangelicalism. And it dates from one of these annotated study Bibles called Dake's, D-A-K-E, Dake's Reference Bible.
Yeah.
Okay? And it comes out of an examination of the Nephilim chapter in Genesis. The sons of God came down, married with daughters of men, and so on and so forth, and bred a race of giants. That's where that argument ultimately gained currency. And the problem, of course, was in order to establish a pure bloodline on any reasonably scientific standard, you would have to have the benefit of genetic science. Okay? Yeah. And you'd also have to have samples of Jesus' DNA. This is another little problem.
Yes.
If you're going to argue that his bloodline was pure, all right, then argue it. Show me the evidence. And the plain fact of the matter is they can't do it.
Right.
What it then becomes is really an argument of a very insidious kind, guised and wrapped in all the swaddling clothes, so to speak, of divine authority to allow yourself the luxury of hating certain groups of people.
Yeah.
And this is the problem. As you say, no one is pure, and that's the point.
Yes.
It's a non-argument in so many ways, Georgianne. It's not even funny, and it's a grotesque perversion.
Oh yeah.
Of any sort of historical Christian doctrine. And I go back to this over and over again. If you look at the formal definitions of the ecumenical councils of the person of Christ, the whole point of the doctrine is to say that the Son of God, the second person of the Trinity, becomes fully man, perfect man. And perfect in this context does not mean pure bloodline.
Right.
It means having all of the faculties and functions of an intact human nature.
Yes.
Okay? And because of this, because the person wrapped up inside that human nature is fully divine, then any actions that he does in human nature redeems all human nature. The word Catholic, then, comes from the Greek, and it means katholu, according to the whole.
Yeah.
So Catholic redemption means, in the thinking of the fathers of the Church, means precisely that this whole redemptive life is offered for everybody, pure or not,
right,
in all stages of humanity, young or old, all the way back to conception and all the way up to the grave. So again, this is the basis of the Church's teaching that no, you don't wait for an age of reason before you accept Jesus and therefore exclude little children from the kingdom of God. This is the principal problem of the Baptist religion, as I like to call it.
It's the problem of a lot of Christian religions.
Yeah, it's the problem of most evangelical forms of Christianity that people think of, you know.
Yeah.
And again, this is not a historical form of Christianity. Historical Christianity, like it or not, it's sacramental and it's for everybody. You can even read in Augustine of Hippo, of all people, statements to the effect that infants are brought to communion.
Yeah.
And again, the reason why is they're partaking in church doctrine teaching. They're partaking of Christ's human nature and therefore of the redemption of human nature.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can quibble with whether or not you believe that doctrine. I'm simply telling you what the doctrine is and what its consequences are.
Yeah.
All right? The teaching that you're talking about, as I think is now clear, is a huge, tremendous perversion and limitation of that doctrine.
Oh, yeah.
And therefore, you know, to use that hated word, it's a heresy.
Yeah.
It's
big time.
Yeah, big time.
Oh.
It's gigantic. You know, when I was in my church days, Georgianne, it was this whole process of thought that kept me out and kept me away from any form of American revivalist religion. I call it the Baptist religion because the whole point of that religion is it's dependent upon you reaching the so-called age of reason, which in itself is inherently stupid.
Yeah.
Because who of us can say that we have reached a certain point in our intellectual and spiritual progress that we know God enough to finally get around to accept Him? You know, God isn't measured by our human intelligence.
Right.
So, you know, the whole thing.
I know
is so foreign
a lot of adults that have never reached the age of reason.
Well, yeah, that's the other teensy tiny problem with it.
Teensy tiny, you
yes,
say?
Teensy tiny. You know, I've just never been sympathetic with it. I grew up. I was baptized Roman Catholic. I grew up in the old Methodist Episcopal Church.
Yeah.
And later, when I was an adult, became Episcopalian and eventually Eastern Orthodox for many years of my life. So I've never been sympathetic to, you know, what I call the Baptist religion in any shape or form. It's just totally foreign to. And I hate to be so blunt, but people need to hear it. It is foreign to the tradition of historical Christianity, be it Lutheran or Roman Catholic or Presbyterian or Eastern Orthodox or Coptic or what have you. It's just a very, very different system.
Yeah. And
people have to understand that. You're not going to understand Russia. Just plain and simple. You're not going to understand Russia unless you understand the huge influence that Orthodoxy has had on its culture.
Oh, yeah.
You know, not for nothing does Mr. Putin align himself with that.
Right.
Because he knows, he may come out of the KGB and all that, that's fine. But the Russians are acutely aware that even if they're not practicing Christians of any sort, they're acutely aware of the huge role that it had on the formation of their national identity and culture.
Yes.
So, and by the same token, you can't understand European history by reading it through American evangelical Baptist lenses. It's just not going to work because it wasn't there.
Yeah. That's right.
So,
by the way, didn't you just love that picture of Putin riding that bear across that stream?
Yeah, wearing his baptismal cross. Yeah.
Yes, I love that picture. What a guy!
That's very clever propaganda on the Russians' part.
Oh,
because,
yeah.
You can't imagine any Western leader daring to ride a bear in the stream.
Yeah.
And it's true. We don't have leaders in the West anymore. We have puppets.
Yes, that's true.
And whether or not Mr. Putin is a puppet for certain forces, or beholden to certain forces, that's certainly true of any politician. But you at least know that he's got his own independent mind.
Yes, he sure does.
And he's certainly able to articulate it.
Very well.
Very well. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Yeah.
He's not the product of the American education system.
Right.
He is
Thank
able to
God.
write grammatical sentences all by himself.
Yes.
And respond to questions without a teleprompter.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Well, that's the other problem we're facing culturally in the West, particularly in America, is we are falling way behind in terms of our education compared to the rest of the world. And again, we can thank our elites for that. And now I think they've really cut America's throat with this Common Core curriculum thing. But that's another show. I'm hoping that you'll get Dr. DeHart on to talk about.
Yes,
that.
I would love to.
Well, judging from his remarks and other teachers I know, there's not a great deal of happiness with this.
Yeah. Before we leave that issue, I think Gordon Duff wrote an article on Veterans Today,
right.
And the little byline in the article was something about nationalist Christians is equals or is a polite way of saying Nazi.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the article. I, to be honest with you, don't rely on that particular source very much. There's a lot of dubious things there, but I think what he's referring to is that there has been,
I think, like Chris Hedges,
Well, Chris Hedges, I certainly wouldn't identify with nationalist Christians. In fact, Chris Hedges
talks about fascists.
He talks about the fascist influence within American evangelicalism, and it's certainly there.
Yeah.
There's this blind equation in most of those people's minds between capitalism and corporations and the mercantilist system we live under, and they're two different things. But that's really a long subject that perhaps we should discuss, because there has been in this country for quite some time, going way back to the days of segregation and the post-Civil War period.
Yeah. There
has been this undertow within certain circles of evangelicalism of racism.
Oh, yeah.
You and I are old enough to remember the preachers in the South that would use their Bible verses to champion and promote segregation.
Yes.
And basically institutionalized racism and bigotry. And again, that whole mentality is absolutely foreign to the doctrine of Christ that I just got done explaining in terms of its manifestation in historical Christianity, because again, the redemptive act is understood to be for everybody, regardless of what your race or your sex or your age is.
Yes.
Or your reasoning capability, for that matter. That's what Catholic really means. It's got nothing to do with universal extent. It has everything to do, so to speak, with the quality of redemptive doctrine. That's what it means. It's for everybody at all times and places. The evangelical movement began to see the rise of these white supremacist Aryan Christian groups in the 50s and 60s. And you can see their influence, I'm thinking in particular during the Oklahoma City bombing.
Yeah.
When everybody was looking for Andreas Strassmeyer. Remember him?
Oh, gee.
Who happened to turn out, just so happens that this German that was over here supposedly to participate in Civil War battlefield reenactments, turns out that he was a graduate of the Hanover Military Academy.
Oh, boy.
Which has a long and esteemed history.
Yeah.
And turns out that this man was also the son of Chancellor Cole's minister without portfolio.
Oh, brother.
In charge of the reunification. So,
oh, my gosh.
When they were looking this national manhunt for Andreas Strassmeyer, he turns back up in Berlin at the press conference. It doesn't get any stranger, folks. But anyway, he had been the security officer for one of these white Christian groups there in Oklahoma at a place called Elohim City.
Yeah.
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 You caught that.
Yeah, we got that. And this group is part of what can only be called a network of these little kind of quasi-evangelical communities that are basically preaching the old Southern segregationist doctrine. That's all it is. Georgiana, the problem is that evangelicalism within this country, in the wider sense, is very powerful in terms of its political connections.
Oh, yeah.
This, as you know, began under Reagan, when he welcomed all of them into the Republican tent. Now the chickens have come home to roost. That's part of the reason the Republican Party's floundering, I think, politically. And Hedges and, a fellow by the name of Jeff Charlotte have written books about this group and their political power. One book is called The Family. There's actually a place in Washington, D.C. This group is partly responsible for the National Prayer Breakfasts and so on and so forth. Senator Inhofe there in Oklahoma has connections to it. And they have been instrumental in praising the anti-homosexual death penalty laws in places like Uganda and Nigeria and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
It's particularly insidious, and hopefully someday I'll be able to get around to writing a book about it. But it's something perhaps we should do a show on, because
yes, we should.
Again, it's American Christianity that basically, lo and behold, has no real problems with American domestic or foreign policy. So it's religion in it's disguised elite policy.
Yes.
Dr. DeHart and I tried to expose some of that with our little book, Yahweh, the Two-Faced God, and how this whole rapture doctrine that so many people think is biblical, and it isn't.
Yeah, right.
But that whole doctrine, when you scratch and sniff long enough, you'll find some very big oil money involved in promoting it.
Oh, yeah.
And, bottom line for me is I have the sinking feeling that what they're about, what their goal is, at least some of these people, is to promote a conflict of religions, particularly with Islam, with the Islamic world.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
At the same time as they've been sponsoring, radical Wahhabist groups and Islamic terrorism and so on and so forth, they're doing that and trying to put in their puppet extremist governments in the Middle East. And in the process, I think, to a certain extent, they are distorting the religion itself.
Oh, yeah.
To a certain extent, not
yes.
much. Not much. That's very important here. I'm not on the Islam as the religion of brotherhood and peace and tolerance bandwagon
No, it's
either.
not.
It's not.
But the Takfiris, the Wahhabis,
the Islamic Brotherhood and all of this stuff.
Yeah.
All of these things have connections to big oil money. They have, at some point, they have connections to the Nazis.
Way back.
Way back. So it's a very, very murky, bleak thing that they're involved with.
Boy, I hope we can do maybe even a series on these issues in relation to the Bible. You know, and another thing, this God that the Israelis or the Jews worship is a racist.
Well, this is the problem with Yahwism.
Yes.
And by Yahwism, people have to understand, I mean the three supposedly great monotheisms, Judaism, Christianity, Islam.
Yeah.
Because at some point they are all based on this morally conflicted character of the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm. And I don't see Jesus being his son.
Well, this is the big problem doctrinally.
And didn't the Pope come out and say something about that the virgin birth was more theological than it was biological?
I don't follow what the Pope says that closely.
Okay.
I don't know what he said. But the problem here of Yahwism is that the moral conflict in the character as depicted in the Old Testament is, as you say, you don't see Jesus as being his son. Well, this is the doctrinal problem.
Yeah.
Because if you look at any historical form of Christianity, it's not, and permit me here to go around Harvey's barn, it is the Western theological culture that says that Christ is the son of the Old Testament character.
Yeah.
That's part of the Western theological culture. But in point of fact, if you look at the actual doctrine, it is made clear over and over again in the liturgies, the traditional liturgies of the church, be it East or West, that Yahweh is Christ. Not that they're two different persons, but rather that Christ is Yahweh in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
So the identification is even tighter, okay? Now, there's reasons why most people in the West, even if they're not terribly religious, tend to think that there are two different characters, and the Old Testament guy is Jesus' father. There's reasons, deep theological reasons within the history of Western Christianity as to why Westerners, even if they're not religious, think that way.
Yeah.
And again, people have to understand, you have these theological perceptions as part of the culture, okay? And those perceptions, in turn, are created by certain things that were done within the evolution of doctrine within the Western Church.
Mm-hmm.
You don't find Easterners making that same sort of assumption.
Good.
No, not good, because if you're identifying Yahweh and Christ, you're importing all of that moral conflict into your system.
Right.
And my point is that people who have suffered at the hands of the churches,
yes,
and we know all the tricks of the programming that have been used.
yes,
the ultimate source of it, in my opinion, is coming from this morally conflicted character.
Yeah.
That's the source of the programming.
Kill all the boys and all the women.
And, you come up with all sorts of theological justifications for the sanction of behavior that under other circumstances most of us would brand immoral.
Yes.
And what this does, in turn, is it empowers the clergy, and all sorts of guilt tricks are used to insist on conformity of some sort or another. Oh, you haven't had enough faith, or you need to re-examine, all been through this, been there, done that.
What I especially despise, Joseph, is when somebody comes down with cancer. Oh, you need to pray more, or you didn't pray enough.
You didn't pray enough, or it's all your fault. And again, this is the legacy of a doctrine that says that you have inherited someone else's moral culpability. No.
I think isn't the only thing that actually and truthfully could be claimed that we inherited from this Adam and Eve couple is death?
That's exactly the Eastern doctrine.
Okay.
That's exactly what you inherit.
Mm-hmm.
You don't inherit. In other words, the problem isn't moral as much as it is physical.
Yes.
But it's wider than this. The bottom line, the way I'm looking at it now, at this point in my life, is that you have the good influences within Christianity are precisely the doctrine of the Incarnation and the Trinity. Okay?
Yes.
But when you examine what these doctrines are based on, they're really not, in my opinion, coming out of the Christian revelation at all, because they were there in so-called pagan cultures long before.
Yes.
Okay. This is the root of the conflict, and we tried to talk about it in Yahweh, the two-faced God, because what Yahwism did is it put itself in perpetual conflict with other religions. In other words, with the Egyptian religion.
Yeah.
Egypt becomes a symbol of everything evil, all right, and idolatrous.
Yeah.
So in other words, you're dealing with secondary religions. They always have to have an enemy to fight.
Oh, yeah.
They define themselves in that sense.
Yes.
By that means. And the problem really is people have to get a very simple equation in their head. God does not equal Yahweh.
Right.
Okay? Once that happens, then you begin to be able to see the moral conflict for what it is.
Yeah, the creator of the universe, or creators of the universe, certainly is not Yahweh.
Well, this is exactly what the early Gnostics said, and this is one of the techniques that is used by, particularly in Christianity, to keep people in line. Well, if you start questioning the identification of Yahweh with the Creator, then that means you're a Gnostic.
Oh, gee.
See, and so therefore, you're taught, kind of programmed, to think, oh, I can't go there.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to.
Oh,
so you stay locked in the system. It's the programming, Georgianne, again, is coming out, in my opinion, out of the morally conflicted character. That's what's the root of the problem.
Yeah.
And, people like Chris Hedges are pointing this out over and over again.
Yes.
That we have to rethink a lot of things.
Oh, yeah.
I in fact, just a couple days ago, it's very interesting that we're talking about all this. A couple days ago, in fact, last night, I was talking with an Episcopal priest, a friend of mine, and he has been saying this for many, many years, that, if Christianity doesn't rethink a lot of things, basic things, it's going to die.
Yes, it is.
And it's worse, and my point here isn't to be picking on Christianity. It's worse in Islam by far, and it's much worse in Judaism. And the reason why is you don't have the presence of those humanizing doctrines like the Incarnation or like the doctrine of the Trinity.
Yeah. Because,
again, those are doctrines that are not coming out of Yahwism. They're coming out of something much older.
Older, yeah.
Yeah. So you don't have the same ameliorating influences there. You have a certain degree of it in Judaism with Kabbalah and things like that, because when you scratch and sniff around those things long enough, you discover you're dealing with versions of what I've been calling the topological metaphor.
Yeah.
You have that in Islamic esoteric systems to a certain degree.
Yes.
But again, you don't find many Muslims are even aware anymore that they've got that whole esoteric tradition within their own religion.
Right.
What has happened is in Islam is almost tragic, because you've either got the secular versions of Islam, or you've got the fundamentalist versions of Islam, and you have this loss, for whatever reason, that their esoteric systems that they were well known for during the Middle Ages are almost completely absent when you look at Islam today.
Yeah.
So the problem, as far as I'm concerned, is this morally conflicted character, and it was a real crisis of conscience for me. It really was. But in the end, I just had to admit that none of my theological training could dispel, in the final analysis, this moral conflict.
Well, with me, there was no moral conflict, Joseph. It just, there's so much that just flat out didn't make sense.
Well, it did. What I'm trying to say is it didn't make sense to me either, but
Yeah.
I was programmed to push all of those objections away.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the programming, to a certain extent, teaches you to be dishonest with your heart.
Yeah.
And in the final analysis, it reached the point where behavior that I had seen on the part of clergymen and hierarchs within the Orthodox Church was being, I was being counseled and told, well, just, ignore it, they'll meet their problems and blah, blah, blah. In other words, I was basically being told that they're going to get away.
Yeah.
And I really had to do some soul searching to understand that the reason that this programming keeps popping up over and over again in every single church that I've ever had any connection to or experience with is because ultimately the source of it is this morally conflicted character that we find in the books of Moses. Once we get to that point, I keep telling people very little in what I think, how I pray, and so on has changed for me, except that one crucial equation.
Yes. Wow.
But that equation is all important because you see, it is the basis for any sort of Christianity.
Well,
that's the problem, and therefore,
why is it a problem, Joseph? Jesus was not a Christian.
But hon, you're not following what I'm saying here. Let me run it by one more time. In any historical church doctrine, the identification is made between Christ and Yahweh. So in other words, there does not exist a church which teaches otherwise.
Yeah.
There's nowhere to go.
Well,
follow me?
I don't go nowhere.
Oh, I don't either.
I stay in my house and pray.
That's what I do. But that's my point. That's my point. It's at the point of that recognition that you have to either be a hypocrite and say, well, I'm going to keep going to XYZ church, even though I've disagreed with this point of doctrine.
Yeah.
You see, or and have my own personal reservations. But at that point, why do you go to church if you're not really a part of a community? If you have reservations of conscience or reason, or for whatever reason, it would be like again for me the moral problem of trying to vote Democratic. I can't be a part of an organization that has support of slavery as part of its party history.
Well, when the thought dawned on me that Jesus was not a Christian, it was like light bulbs went off, you know.
Well, it happens for different people in different ways.
Yeah.
And again, the real trick is to acknowledge and deal honestly with what your heart is telling you.
Mm-hmm.
There are many, many beautiful things about Orthodoxy that, have deeply influenced me. But the bottom line is that nasty identification. It's driven home in Orthodoxy much more forcefully than it is in Western Christianity.
Mm.
So, ultimately, you still have the same sort of problems. They manifest in very different ways.
Yeah.
But the programming is definitely there.
Yeah, and it is programming.
And it is programming.
Definitely. And I think Paul hijacked what we call Christianity, and he was a very wealthy man.
Well, I'm not. Yeah, he certainly was.
And connected. Oh boy, was he connected.
Yeah, that too.
In Rome. Oh.
I'm not even going there.
Okay.
I'm not even going there because eventually, I want to address all this somehow. There is, if you look at Christianity, what you have, I think, is a gigantic recasting of Osirianism.
Yes.
In Yahweh's clothes.
Yeah.
So you've taken something uniquely Egyptian that had its own moral implications and twisted it in such a way.
Mm-hmm.
In a huge way, that you've created a system that everybody has to follow this moral law, except at the very top, and we can go around and slaughter whoever we want to if God says so.
Yeah, it's funny how God talks to all these mucky mucks,
that want to go around slaughtering people.
Yeah,
isn't that funny?
Yeah.
There's so many problems, not the least of which is, depending on what biblical scholar you want to talk to, there are scholars that believe that the books of Moses weren't even written anywhere remotely close to the events that they purport to describe in terms of time. And
right.
The standard academic line has been circa 621 BC. Now there's a scholar pushing it even later in history. So if there even is a Yahweh character, in these theories, no, the character is a creation of an elite.
And didn't they borrow a lot of that from the Sumerians?
Yeah, they borrow from Sumerian texts and so on and so forth. So if you follow that line of thinking, I'm not entirely sold on it, but if you follow that line of thinking, again, you're dealing with, bluntly put, you're dealing with academic studies, while they will never come out and use the words, are telling you this was all the creation of a huge conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what they're saying.
Well, Joseph, look at the Jews say that 144 of them will go to heaven, and God gave us this land. Excuse me, where's the deed?
Well, that's one little problem. There's
well, it's a huge problem,
well,
Joseph.
Yeah,
they're killing people.
Of course, it's a huge problem. And again, this is the problem with most American evangelicalism, because again, if you're following any sort of genuine Christian teaching, there's the universal redemptive act of Christ abolishes the necessity for all that.
Yeah.
So to say that there's some divine sanction on a particular group of people to occupy somebody else's land the whole point of the New Testament is, hey, it's a New Testament. The old one's gone.
Yeah.
On and on we can go, Georgianne. But the bottom line is, if you look at the vast sweep of human history, we have what I call metaphor cultures. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that these cultures are fonts of wisdom and lack of excess, because they certainly had their own grisly excesses. All right?
Yes.
So please don't think that I'm saying that. But you have metaphor cultures, and then along comes the first glimmer of this Yahwist religion, with Akhenaten in Egypt, and from there, then we get Yahwism and so on and so forth. And there's this long progression away from metaphor cultures into monotheistic religions. And monotheistic religions are very different from metaphor cultures in one fundamental aspect that was pointed out by the famous mythologist Joseph Campbell. In the metaphor cultures, what you have is the study of God through nature.
Yes.
Okay? In the secondary religion cultures, the revealed religion cultures, you have the study of a book.
Yeah.
Of a text.
Yeah.
And you have a divided sociological space. We're true, everybody else is not. We've got to spread the faith.
Yeah.
What you have is a movement away from metaphor cultures, and then beginning with the Renaissance, something very peculiar starts to happen. You have a slow, gradual turning back to a metaphor culture.
Oh.
That's the part of the story that people aren't latching on to. Okay? Now, I'm mentioning all this because when we're talking about these plutocratic elites, they follow these big, huge movements of history very carefully. Oh, yeah. They're very aware of all of this, Georgianne. Very, very aware. Not for nothing did I point out in Financial Vipers of Venice that you have this peculiar connection of Giordano Bruno with the Venetians.
What they did to him is unforgivable.
Yes, but wait a minute. You're missing something.
Oh.
You're missing something.
Okay.
Giordano Bruno, where does he go? He goes first to Venice, then from Venice to Paris, from Paris to Oxford, from Oxford to London, from London back to Paris, from Paris to Frankfurt, and Heidelberg, and Württemberg, and then from there back to Venice.
Yeah.
You're dealing with a spy.
Oh, my gosh.
For Venice.
Oh, gee. And they burned him?
And they murdered him.
Yes.
Yes. Why? Well, the publicly stated reason is for what he was thinking and teaching. True enough.
Yeah.
But when you look at Venice, when you read Financial Vipers of Venice, you're going to encounter a fellow by the name of Gasparo Cardinal Contarini. Okay? Now, what's Cardinal Contarini up to? Well, for one thing, he's writing letters back and forth to Martin Luther.
Oh, God. Oh.
Okay? And he's praising Luther. He loves this system. And at the same time, Cardinal Contarini is the sort of chairman, so to speak, setting up the Council of Trent.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, boy.
So
it's thicker and thicker.
Yes, it's huge, Georgie.
Oh, gosh.
It's huge. It's gigantic. So, people, I'm putting all these things out there to make you think, connect dots, start to think, because what begins to happen during the Renaissance is you find this rebirth of Hermeticism.
Yeah. Then
something happens when Hermeticism is quickly driven back underground. And it takes a while, but by the time you get to Newton and Descartes and Leibniz, it's back full bore.
Yeah.
So there's a huge sweeping movement of history underway in all of this, folks, beginning millennia ago with the move away from metaphor cultures, and now, after the Renaissance, a move back to it. The problem is the people moving back to it are themselves twisting it in major ways.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yes, it is.
But, the metaphor is so important, folks, because if you pick up the Egyptian pyramid text and open and start reading from the very beginning, the pyramid texts start with, "This is my beloved son, Atum Ra, in whom I'm well pleased."
Yeah.
Does that sound like something from the Gospel of St. John?
Yes, it does.
Well,
yes, it
does.
does.
Bingo, over and over. So in other words, something else happens during all this movement. A culture, in order to survive, I think, this is my opinion, had to adapt itself to circumstances and go underground.
Oh-ho.
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 See, this is an old story.
Yeah.
Why do you write so many books? Well, I'm telling one story. Think of each of these books as a chapter.
Yeah.
It's one big, huge story.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
Gee.
The easiest way to manipulate mankind is what? Religion and division.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Get white people hating black people.
Yeah.
Black people hating whites.
Yeah.
Hate the Mexicans.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep everybody divided. Does that sound like a familiar theme?
Yeah, it sure does. Good grief, Joseph.
Yeah.
Well,
this is huge.
It's certainly liberating to understand that Jesus was not a Christian.
Well, even, I'm not here to trash Christianity. Christianity had an enormous influence in the evolution of our culture.
Yeah.
And I think predominantly a good one.
Well, kill the Indians.
I still think a predominantly good one. Killing, that part of it, isn't coming out of, in my opinion, the Hermetic influences within Christianity. It's coming out of the Yahwist influence.
Yes.
So in other words, this is why I keep saying, this is a conflicted religion.
Oh, yeah.
The conflict comes from the character.
Oh, yeah.
You see, this is the problem. So I'm not tarring the whole thing as evil or bad. That's just simply not true.
Well, but the average mentality,
the average mentality now, yeah,
can't separate it.
No, I know that. But the problem is the average mentality is going to be overtaken by events because the separation's already underway. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yes, it is.
It's happening. And it's happening in amazing ways. Most of my friends that I've had for a long time are in some way connected with the church at some point.
Oh.
And most of my close friends are having precisely these types of, I won't say crises of conscience, but they are coming to huge realizations, yes.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
Good.
And these are clergymen.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Protestant clergymen, Episcopalian clergymen, in one or two cases, Orthodox people that quietly correspond with me, in one or two cases Roman Catholics, it's happening.
Wow. Good grief. Well, we've seen some mighty big religious organizations go down.
Yes.
In the last few years.
Yes, we have.
And that's not all bad.
It's. I don't think humanity is ever going to escape religion. It's really a question of what kind are we going to have, and how are we going to act. Ultimately, the difference between Western Christianity and Eastern Christianity, for example, is a Western Christian, when he hears the statement, God is love, Love is a noun. The way
Yeah.
he hears that sentence.
Yeah.
In Eastern Christianity, love is a verb.
Yes. Action. Action. Yeah.
Action. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do? Is the question.
Ooh. Yeah.
Not what are we going to think.
Big
difference.
Yeah.
Big
Huge.
difference.
Huge, Joseph. My
Yep.
goodness. Well, let's plan on doing a file on all of this and bringing in the corporations, how that is outlined in the Bible, and let's just give them a run for their money.
Well, at some point, I'm working on a new book, as you know. So.
Oh boy.
And it's it's going to be. I think it's going to be an eye opener for some people.
Oh, undoubtedly, Joseph. You don't realize. I really don't think you do. How many people, their lives that you have affected all over this planet. And I mean it. I get emails, wonderful emails about you.
Well, I hope for good.
Yes, that you've opened a lot of people's eyes and gotten them to think, to really think.
Well, that's good.
You betcha.
The more people with eyes open, the less blind people we have walking around.
Yeah. Oh, Joseph.
He said, uttering a tautology.
Oh. Well, I'll close with something kind of cute. I found a picture of a bear in a swimming pool.
Yeah, I saw that.
And the caption is, "You build houses in my woods. I swim in your tiny lake."
Yep. Yep.
I love that.
Yeah, well, it's true.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing. They're building their elite castles, and we're swimming in their tiny little lakes.
Yeah. So I want to thank everybody that has contributed to the Byte Show.
You're here.
It is, believe me, it is very meaningful and extremely important, especially now. Thank you. With all my heart, a heartfelt thank you to everyone out there that has helped. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, same goes for me, folks. I want to thank everybody for sending the donations and for the memberships in the website and for sending the articles and the comments and stuff, because that's keeps me going. So thank all of you out there, especially that dear lady. You know who you are, and everybody else.
And a special hello to Dag.
Okay. Hello,
yeah.
Dag.
Hello, Dag.
Okay.
And thank you, Joseph.
Oh, thank you for having me back.
Oh, any time. And we'll confabulate on our next one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That sounds... Oh, so we're going to plot.
Yeah.
I love plotting and scheming.
I know. You play these little war games, and you figure out new equipment and all this.
Oh yes.
And,
that's my dark side. Everyone has to be in touch with their inner Hitler. So.
Oh boy. Gee.
Anyway.
So God bless everybody out there that's listening. Joseph Farrell has a PayPal button on his website. It is GizaDeathStar.com. Please make use of it. We've got to keep these interviews going. We've got to keep him in research material. And by the way, a lot of that research material is pretty expensive.
Oh, don't even go there, George. You would be appalled at the research budget that I've had the last couple months, but it's been necessary to get this new book done. But thank you for that. I appreciate it. Work out George Ann's PayPal button too, folks.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely, work out George Ann's button.
And remember what George Carlin said.
Yes.
Life is sacred. Kill for God.
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.